So we thought that this year we'll do a presentation on Biodiversity Stewardship 101. We always get a lot of questions about biodiversity stewardship, so this is sort of an attempt to address some of the most common questions that people ask, and also to address a lot of the misconceptions. There's a lot of misconceptions about what biodiversity stewardship is and how it works and so on. So yeah, we'll start off with a short introduction to who conservation outcomes is and what sort of work we do. So my name is Wentzel and I'm a conservation manager with Conservation Outcomes.
Hello everybody, I'm Abdul-Lateef Ismail and I'm the project facilitator for the Greater Chrome Stewardship project, which is run by Conservation Outcomes.
Yeah, so we're the Eastern Cape team, so we're not a big NGO, but we work across the country, so we've got a couple of colleagues in other provinces, but we basically at this stage the Eastern Cape team. So we're a non-profit company and a public benefit organization that basically supports the development and management of land for biodiversity conservation. And the cornerstone of the work we do is called biodiversity stewardship. So in short, for those that's not sure what biodiversity stewardship is, it's basically protected area expansion and management support to those protected areas. So that's the name of our game, is biodiversity stewardship. And yeah, so to just explain that in a little bit more detail, so biodiversity stewardship is basically a conservation approach to establish new conservation areas and protected areas on private and communal land by basically entering into agreements with and partnerships with those landowners. To make biodiversity stewardship work, we basically need two key ingredients. So firstly, we need to identify where those important biodiversity areas are. I'm quite keen to look at that thicket map to see where those little remnants of important intact thicket is. But then we also need willing landowners. Landowner willingness, unfortunately or fortunately, it's a voluntary thing, so you can't force landowners to conserve. So we typically try and seek out the important biodiversity areas and then try and find the willing landowners within those areas and work with them. So basically, biodiversity stewardship recognizes the landowner as the custodians and the stewards of the biodiversity on their land. And the idea is to then support and capacitate landowners to conserve and manage their land for conservation. And NGOs often play a big role in that process. So there's different biodiversity stewardship options available. We're not going to have time to go through all of them, but you basically, in broad terms, you get your formal protected areas and then you get your conservation areas. Our organization is primarily focused on the protected areas options, simply because that provides the longest and most strongest legal protection, conservation protection for the land. So that's sort of what we try and focus our efforts on. And basically there's the three options for protected areas. It's either a national park, and that option isn't available for all landowners, but in certain instances private land can also become part of a national park. But then there's also nature reserve options and protected environment options, which are the more common options for private landowners. So the question is, why would landowners want to do this? Why would they want to conserve and enter into formal agreements and have it's quite a formal process to declare a protected area. So why would landowners want to do this? And there's a number of answers to this. I mean, there are some benefits and so on, but in my experience, and I've been doing this for quite a number of years, in my experience dealing with landowners, and it agrees with what Odette said earlier, it's a matter of the heart. So it requires mostly a specific type of landowner. And the primary motivation, from what I found with talking to a lot of landowners that wants to explore stewardship for their land, is that although there may be some benefits, those benefits aren't really their primary motivation. The primary motivation is that it's landowners that wants to participate in something bigger than themselves and that wants to conserve their land beyond their own lifetime. And that's really the primary motivation, and that's the sort of landowner that we're seeking out. So I often get asked the question, what are the benefits? And my standard response to landowners is, if you want to do this for benefits, then you're probably doing it for the wrong reason, and you should think twice whether this is for you or not. If the primary benefit is that you get long-term conservation security for your land, and if that's not enough to convince you, that there may be other benefits, but those are cherries on top of it. So if that's not that primary motivation is not enough to convince you, then maybe this isn't for you.
Thank you, Wentzel. So I'll just give a very broad spatial overview of conservation outcomes work in the Eastern Cape. So this is specifically looking at the broader thicket landscape. Conservation outcomes do have some stewardship sites towards the east, towards the Drakensberg and the grasslands there, but we're focusing on the western half of the Eastern Cape today. So as you can see, I hope everybody can see the map over there, but all of the green polygons in that map are stewardship sites from conservation outcomes. So they either formally declared protected areas or they're undergoing the process of declaration. And overall that equates to more than 35,000 hectares. And that's including the Greater Crom Stewardship Project just to the south in the Copa local municipality. So the sites range from as small as 20 hectares near St. Francis to more than 19,000 hectares in our largest stewardship site. And despite the vary in size and vary in land use sometimes and vary in ecosystem type and vegetation too, all of the stewardship sites do have one important thing in common, and that is that they contain important biodiversity. So indeed, biodiversity assessment is actually the first part of the declaration process. So we look at such things as critical biodiversity areas, threatened ecosystems like Wentzel Renosterveld, which you also get Renosterveld in the Eastern Cape, by the way, to the bottom left over there. Threatened species as well, like Soralia repens, it's a near threatened unendemic to the right over there. Also important water features, wetlands, and corridors which support ecosystem connectivity. And yeah, just going back to the previous map, that biodiversity assessments we've done also in the red polygons, and that is more than 30,000 hectares, and that is supporting incorporation into national parks. Yeah, so this next part of the presentation is going to be a bit of an internal dialogue between Wentzel and I, and we'll be trying to address some frequently asked questions about biodiversity stewardship. So I'll sort of role play as a prospective landowner, and Wentzel won't role play as a stewardship expert because that's what he is. So I'll start with the first question, Ian, and that is, what would be the status of my land if I do declare?
Yeah, so we'll focus on the two most common options just for the sake of time, nature reserves and protected environments. So both will be declared in terms of the Protected Areas Act, so your land would attain protected area status, formal recognition as a protected area, also formal protection for the land under the Protected Areas Act. So protected environments are declared in terms of Section 28 of the Protected Areas Act, and nature reserves in terms of Section 23. But both are recognized as formal protected areas.
Next question is, how long can I declare my land for?
So nature reserves are declared into perpetuity, and protected environments can be declared for a minimum period of 30 years, but most landowners opt to declare it for longer, into perpetuity. And I think mostly it's because a lot of landowners that wants this for their land wants the long-term conservation security, so they opt for the longer option.
I think I might not need the mic. Is that all right? Okay, so if I declare, do I still retain ownership of my land?
Yeah, so that's an easy one, and it also happens to be a very common misconception. People think that it's a way for government to get their hands on the land or something like that. But the short answer is yes, you retain full ownership of the land.
if I do declare my land, will I lose any of my existing rights as a landowner?
So also a common misconception, and all your existing rights remain in place. By declaring your land as a protected area, it won't impact on any of your existing rights as a landowner. You do, however, obviously by declaring your land, commit yourself to managing your land for conservation, but it doesn't impact on any of your existing rights.
So who will manage the land once it's declared?
Yeah, so when we declare a protected area, a management authority gets assigned in terms of the Protected Areas Act. So if you think about in the case of national parks, you've got sandparks that's assigned as the management authority over the national park. And in the same way, when we declare a private protected area like a nature reserve or protected environment, the landowner or an entity or person that the landowner wants to have assigned gets assigned. But typically it's the landowner themselves that gets assigned as the management authority. And so they essentially attain the same legal status as what sandparks would have over national parks. That assignment is done in terms of exactly the same section of the legislation, just for nature reserve or protected environment. But the landowner gets assigned as the management authority and has all the rights and responsibilities and privileges of a management authority in terms of the Protected Areas Act.
And what are those responsibilities of the management authority?
Yeah, so in simple terms, management authority is responsible for managing the land, and most landowners does that in any ways. The Protected Areas Act does place some requirements on a management authority, and there's basically three main requirements. The first is that the reserve must, or the protected area must have a management plan, and we typically help landowners with that process if they need our help with that. So we are able to develop management plans for them with their inputs, of course. So it's not a case that we develop it and now they must implement this thing. You know, we basically have interactive sessions with the landowners, extract all of the information from them, and basically tailor the management plan to their needs and the needs of the land as well. So that's the first requirement, the management plan. And then the second one, so the management plan is your long-term strategic document. Then you have an annual plan of operation, which is your short-term, what are we going to do this year? Whereas your management plan is what are we going to do over the next 10 years. And then your annual plan of operation translates into the third requirement, which is an annual management report. And that sounds scary, and I know there are some people that have had bad experiences with the annual management reports, thinking that it needs to be a very comprehensive, onerous thing. But we have developed a very simple Excel-based tool that if you populate your annual plan of operation, then it produces the annual report as well. So it makes it just so much easier, quicker, and much more valuable, really, in terms of the annual reporting. So those are the three requirements on the management authority side.
So if I do declare, would my land be safe from future prospecting or mining threats?
So that's a good question for the Karoo farmers especially, but not just the Karoo farmers, but fracking in the Karoo is of course a big concern for a lot of landowners. And just maybe to quickly explain the context behind it, because I realized over the years that few people understand how the mining legislation works in the country. So mineral resources doesn't belong to the landowner, it belongs to the state. So the state can issue a prospecting or a mining right on your property without your consent. They don't need the landowner's consent, which is of course a big risk, especially if you want to conserve your land over the long term. And so Section 48 of the Protected Areas Act makes it very clear that there's no commercial prospecting or mining permitted on national parks and nature reserves. So nature reserve status and national park status would essentially give you full protection against commercial mining and prospecting. Protected environment status provides some degree of protection, but not full protection. So to quickly summarize it, basically prospecting and mining can still take place on a protected environment if the Minister of TFFE agrees to it. So it does provide some level of protection, but not completely.
So if I do declare my land, would I need to allow the public onto my land?
Also a very common misconception. So no, you as I mentioned earlier, by declaring your land, you're not impacting on any of your existing rights. That includes the rights of being private land. So you as the landowner and the management authority gets to decide whether you want people on your land or not. And if so, under what rules? That's part of the privileges of being a management authority. You can make internal rules for your reserve as well. So yeah, the short answer is no, it's up to the landowner and the management authority, and usually those are the same thing.
Hunting, fishing and grazing of livestock and development, are those things allowed on my land after declaration?
So this is a question that requires a very long answer, but I'm going to try and give you the short version. So let's start with hunting and fishing and grazing of livestock. So the Protected Areas Act makes it quite clear that sustainable utilization of natural resources is perfectly fine within a protected area, even within national parks. As far as hunting and fishing and grazing of livestock is concerned, so on a private protected area, all of those things is permissible. Of course, the management plan needs to accommodate for that, so that is something we need to build into the management plan. But that is perfectly compatible with a protected area. Of course, it needs to happen in a sustainable manner. And as far as developments is concerned, again, it requires a very long answer, but the short answer is that any developments that's compatible with conservation is permissible on a private protected area. And I'll use one simple example on a state reserve. It's maybe a bit of an extreme example, but if you go to Kruger National Park and you go to Skukuza, that's almost like a mini town in the middle of the park, because that section of the park has been zoned for tourism, infrastructure, and so on. And in the very same way, appropriate and compatible infrastructure on private land can be developed within the protected area. But you do, of course, have committed your land to conserving the biodiversity. So the management plan would need to make provision for that development, and it needs to be compatible with the purpose for which you declared the reserve.
So I really want to keep my giraffe in the thicket environment. Would extra limital species be allowed after declaration?
Yeah, the extra limital species one is a bit of a controversial topic. The current provincial policy is that they don't want extra limital species on nature reserves, but they do allow them on protected environments. So that's the current provincial stance. The Protected Areas Act, just to mention, doesn't make it non-permissible to have extra limitals there. So the national legislation does allow it, but the provincial policy is currently not to have extra limitals on nature reserves, but they do allow them on protected environments.
And then finally, what tax benefits would be applicable if my land is declared?
So, sorry, I just forgot one thing to mention with the previous question. In instances where there are extra limitals and the landowner is willing to phase them out over time, or to have a program in place to try and manage them, like we all know warthog is never going to be phased out, so to at least have a plan in place to manage them, then that is fine, and of course that forms part of the management plan.
So what tax benefits would be applicable if my land is declared?
Yeah, so for a protected environment, there's no real sensible tax benefits. But for a nature reserve and national park option, there's basically two main benefits, fiscal benefits. The first one is a municipal property rates rebate. So Section 17(1)(e) of the Municipal Property Rates Act basically exempt nature reserves and national parks from having to pay municipal property rates. There are some fine print around that, which I don't have time to go into now, but you can ask me afterwards if you want. But then there's also the potentially more substantial tax benefit, which is the Section 37D Income Tax Act, that allows for a 4%, you can basically deduct 4% of the value of the land from your income tax every year for 25 consecutive years. And it's only the registered landowner that can do that. Yeah, thank you so much, and we'd love to take any questions. I'm sure there are some.